Put it there. Yes. It's warm.
Yeah, it is. Who can we talk to about the AC?
I can talk with staff.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not just you. Yeah.
And are the other rooms warm as well? I don't know if we're gonna have an interrogation, you know, like the heat on this floor.
You got a coat.
Yeah, I was thinking, I saw you wearing your coat. I'm like, man, he's got to be roasted.
It's pretty warm. Trying to do my best Matt Gobert impersonation with the suit. And
Yours is- it's not white with stripes.
I know.
He makes that work.
I took I was gonna wear a bow tie, but you know, I only have one black bow tie, and I was like, that's a little too much, you know. So Dan, I'm moderating as well, so
Okay.
I'll do a brief bio introduction. And... Okay.
John, and
Okay.
then I'll kick it to him. And we'll do.
Okay.
We won't go back and forth.
Okay.
I'll do the first part. Slides in the kick.
Okay, perfect. I don't know if you guys saw, but I did have a small issue with the clicker when I started, but should be up and running now. All right. Pfeffer, I'll do Pfeffer. That's okay. Perfect. Let's see. Are you guys 9 o'clock or 8:45?
It was 8:45.
Yeah.
You can allow 5 minutes at the end.
For questions and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
10 minutes also.
yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Time got to wait for
We're
it.
not gonna run out of time.
Okay. Perfect.
But will you? It depends on questions, right?
Well, let's go ahead and get you guys started then. Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to 23-4C. Glad you guys could be with us. My name is Randy Bartley. I'm moderating this track today, and want to introduce John Pfeffer and Dan, what's your last name? Wood. So they're going to co-present on this one, but I've got a bio on both of them. Mr. Pfeffer has performed, supervised, and managed environmental projects in the petroleum refining, petrochemical, and upstream oil and gas industries for over 29 years. His industry experience includes numerous Clean Air Act compliance projects involving new source review permitting, Title V permitting and compliance, benzene waste operations, NSPS, B1, is that how you say it? I want to make sure I get that correct. Consent decree negotiation and compliance, LDAR program implementation and management, NSPS, and maximum achievable control technology, MACT regulations. Prior to joining Trihydro, he managed the environmental compliance programs and environmental professional staff for petroleum refineries in Wyoming and Texas. At Trihydro, Mr. Pfeffer provides direction for air quality projects, including evaluating compliance alternatives for refinery and oil and gas regulatory programs, air regulatory programs. Okay. And then Mr. Wood's experience includes project management and regulatory support for companies affected by federal, state, and local air environmental regulations. He specializes in roles related to OGI. His project experience includes OGI surveying using an infrared camera, natural gas compressor vent flow measurements, permitting assistance, emissions modeling, calculating oil and gas emissions, Method 21 monitoring, and consent decree compliance. He serves as the air technical lead for Trihydro's Leak Tracker Pro OGI fugitive emissions data software solution. Thank you, John. And there is I'm sorry, John, there is a sign-in sheet that, oh, I've got it here. We'll pass this around. All yours.
And it is roasty toasty in here.
Yeah.
And thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. I'll give that to you, Dan.
You staying back here?
I'm gonna stay back here.
All right, I
That's
didn't
all
want to do a little cha-cha with you.
Yeah.
a little dance. I'm going to turn this so that you can see my needs. Thanks. As Randy mentioned, my name's John Pfeffer. Good, long, extremely long bio. I usually abbreviate it. So I've been primarily doing EH&S work in the downstream world for close to 30 years. But Jumping into the upstream world the last half a decade and working with Trihydro, learning a bit from guys like Dan who spent a lot of time in the field. He's got a lot, and it'll become apparent in the discussion. Dan's going to do most of the presenting today, and the experience Dan brings, I think, ties directly into what everybody's all excited about, which is new and upcoming regulatory changes. We're all collectively scratching our heads on a bit, but
Don't shoot the messenger.
yeah, it's not his fault. That's right. Exactly right. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background. We start with a safety moment. I forgot that. So I'd like to do a quick little safety moment. If any of you were in our presentation yesterday, you got to see this too. But Dan actually shot this video, I believe, right? This was you, or it was one of our cohorts of, how do I restart that? There we go. A couple of folks working down in the hall, making a repair, a flange repair, but had their getting a snoot full of gas. You can tell that the camera's turned on this scene. You don't always see exactly what those hidden hazards are. Good example. Waiting for you if you're not paying attention, and a good example of a safety, health and safety aspect of an OGI camera. We were there to do fugitive or OGI camera surveys, but found a safety issue and called it their attention and stopped the work. This was a good example of that. The objectives for today, I mentioned we're going to talk about these new rules that have been proposed. I'll start with a little bit of background. I'll tee it up with a couple of slides on that, and then let Dan jump into the details of the new proposed regulations and where we think those may be going, and the things that we see as key points, but also questions, that are still to be answered. I think there's still a little bit of work to be done with the final rulemaking, and we're, as with everybody, trying to determine the best course of action to understand what might be coming. Help our clients, but help the regulated industry understand what's awaiting us out there. Background on the rules. I was going to talk just briefly about the Quad O series. Of course, we rehash this a lot, but the Quad O, we put the effective dates in here just for reference and thinking a little bit more about what might happen with the new proposed Quad OOOOb and what that effective date. It's supposed to be a certain date, but whether it will be that date or not, there's some debate over that. Reminding us collectively too that the Quad OOOab was the first reg to bring in the concept of methane into these rules. Carries forward in Quad OOOb and Quad OOOc, but I guess the point we're trying to make on this effective date is historically, traditionally under rulemaking, we would see what's referred to as an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, and that's what we effectively saw in the publication. I would say the original publication, which was more of the concept phase in 2021, the collection of comments around the ideas that were posed at the time. So we saw rule language come out in 2022 for the first time. Typically, that would be, you would have to have actually proposed rule language for that to become the effective date. The NSPS is based off of the publication date of the proposed rule, but typically relies on rule language. Significant change in that rule language that was published in 2022 versus 2020. So question is, will 11/15 of 2021 be the effective date for the majority of the rule? It was, I guess I would point out that there was a distinction made for the centrifugal compressor dry seals on centrifugal compressors specifically have an effective date with the 2022 published date. And so EPA has recognized a distinction there with new regulatory language, new requirements are going with that more recent date. But there's an argument I know will be made that there was enough change in the underlying rule as a whole that be a push to try to bring that to 2022 as an effective date. So it's a debate. I started off with a big question on, do we know when this rule will become effective? No. Or what the effective date will be. We know what it's proposed to be, but we don't. I suspect there'll be challenges to that. And then Quad OOOc brings in the concept of applying these requirements to existing sources, understanding too that that'll be handled through state implementation plans, through emission guidelines. That concept is understood in general, I would think, by everybody, but the devil's in the details on how each state will do that. And I think you're going to spend some time talking about how that might happen. presentation today. And Dan had pointed out in the presentation yesterday too, that, be aware there's from a fiscal note standpoint, there's no funding or cost allocated in this rule in OOOOc until 2026. So the expectation is we're going to take some time to implement. We all believe that'll happen because there'll be SIP revisions that have to occur, and again, get into some detail on that. And this was just a snapshot of the Quad OA rule process from beginning to 2021. And now we're into a new phase with Quad OB and C. For emphasis, I guess, that this can be a tortured process sometimes. You get challenges in litigation and legislation, Congressional Review Act in this case, that occurred in 2020, or some proposed rules to rescind proposed rules that were out there in 2020. So it's anybody's guess where we'll end up a decade from now on these rules, but and much less in the next year. We're hoping we have a little more clarity on that over the course of the next year. So that's what that slide is for.
Good question.
Yeah, you bet.
Quad OOOOc applies to existing infrastructure, kind of brownfield assets, to use that language. Quad OB applies to greenfield moving forward, if I got that right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, let me back up and see if I've got it noted. The triggers for the NSPS is what we're talking about. So yes, that's exactly right. If you use the term brownfield or existing, there's sources that have not been constructed in these date ranges or since these date ranges were for the effective rule, modified or reconstructed. So and those are defined in the regulation. So yes, you can have an existing facility that gets modified or reconstructed that triggers the rule, that will trigger the current rule in effect at that time. So then you are thinking of Quad OB correctly, that coming forward, it will affect sources that are constructed, modified or reconstructed after this date today as proposed, but it might be a 2022 date. So
not non-modified, not brownfield assets where nothing has changed.
Yeah, we're correct. If you don't modify the source, Quad OC will bring those in. I mean, that's the concept. The intent is it's going to capture the existing sources that don't already have applicability because they were not constructed, modified, constructed in this window.
Probably
Forward.
be asset owners will probably want to apply a consistent high bar across
Good. I think some people will for lots of reasons. Sometimes it's simplification. Sometimes it's just culture. They have a value. They want to bring things to a high level as possible, or to be as compliant as possible, or to be reducing emissions as much as possible. So
economically, sorry for the
yeah,
diversion.
no, that's good. That's what we want, actually.
Okay, so economically, when B becomes effective, if I have brownfield and greenfield projects, economically, I only really need to apply it to my greenfield, albeit greenfield could be existing, that's modified or existing constructed. Economically, from an ESG perspective, maybe my shareholders want me to do it.
And you might do that over time, right? You might spread that across budget cycles to make that happen. Yes, that's exactly right. And thank you for commenting. I mean, I meant to say that at the beginning. Please interrupt. Please stop us. We were in a room yesterday where you could not hear at the back of the room. We kept stumbling into that, and we're going to have that problem today. But please interject. Ask a question anytime, and appreciate the input. I think that's where I pitch it. No, okay. So I'm going to show these are the proposed sources, and Dan, the next series of slides will speak to each of these in detail. What's in the rule and the things that we teased out that we wanted to point out associated with each of these. But this slide is really just for illustration of the different categories of sources that are affected by this rule. The next slide goes into it, so I'll pitch it to Dan Wood.
All right, you guys ready for this? All right, so like John said, we're going to kind of go through each one of these kind of source types that probably go. First one that I'm going to start off with, there's storage vessels. And historically, for those of you that have dealt with it, you've dealt with the 6 ton per year per day, right? So you can even add storage vessels and end up finding ways of getting underneath the 6 tons per year. there's lots of ways that even the state sometimes, you know, through the legal and practically enforceable piece that sometimes allow you to stick under the 6 tons per year. No longer. With Quad OB, if they're vapor, liquid manifolded, or adjacent, you're talking about the 6 tons per year for the entire battery. So now you're aggregating all of your tanks. That's a big change, right? You know, that's going to pull in pretty much every tank system that I'm familiar with. And even, you know, we'll talk about it briefly, but one of the challenges there is going to be like dry gas. You know, if you have a gas field and you just have a water tank out there, that's a challenge, right? Now, you very well could be technically over 6 tons per year for a single tank sitting out there, but not have enough combustible vapor to even combust to install some sort of, even a VRU, you know, any sort of, a lot of times there's a lot of oxygen on those, so you can't install VRU or get into, you know, even being able to combust your gas with some sort of combustor. The other piece here is they pull in methane. So it's not just VOC anymore. You got 20 tons per year methane threshold as well. So if you go over that 20 tons, again, you're going to actually have to install some sort of control system on your tank system. Modification is any single vessel or battery, any physical operational change that could result in the increase of methane or VOC. And pulling out methane here, right? So that could be, you know, addition of storage vessels, increase in capacity. You do something to a well, you add a well, whatever it is, you have to reevaluate at that time. The big piece here is you're going to be required to reduce methane emissions by 95%. EPA was seeking comment on whether or not they wanted to try and go 98%. Right now, as written, it's looking like it's still going to be 95. So, you know, looks like we're going to be safe there. Yeah. So that's going to be, it's kind of a strange concept because essentially if you're going to be permitting, if you have a single pad or centralized battery, that pad is going to be. So you know, even if they're not vapor manifolded, if you're over that 6 tons per year, or 20 tons, likely going.
So it's considered that basis.
Get the full aggregation.
And modification, saying when you're, I mean, what if you're like transforming one of these? I mean, the emissions.
Well, essentially, yes, you could have an increase in emissions. So anytime that you could have a net increase in emissions, you'll have to read it.
That like mandated you have records of that.
They don't specifically call that out, but I definitely would. At least in the rule right now, there's nothing in there that specifically says you have to. But if you're, especially in the case where you're going, no, we're not going to be subject to Quad OB, I would have all of that documentation on file, sure. That's one of those things, because anytime a regulatory agency calls up and goes, so we're out at this pad, you know, we see that, you know, you've got vapor emissions coming off your tanks. Where's your combustor? Did you guys do a Quad OB analysis? Yeah, we did. And try and search through all of your papers.
Stupid question. Right.
No stupid questions.
But the objective of 95% reduction, and maybe you answered this yesterday, so I apologize. What is the baseline? You know, let's say I own a battery tanks and okay, a standard applies and I'm on the hook to reduce my methane emissions by 90%. Who and how do I establish the baseline from which I'm reducing by 90%?
So in this case, it's strictly control efficiency essentially. So a VRU, you can achieve that with 5% capture, or on a whether it's a combustor or flare or a low pressure flare, usually, you name this flare company, they're gonna rate their flare to, 98% or 95%. For me, this is actually one of the ones that's actually really scary. This is one of those things that's gonna be quite costly in a lot. Ultimately, we've seen this in a few places, Colorado and Mexico. Mexico is a precursor, but ultimately, all gas-driven pneumatic controllers are going to have zero emissions, so require zero emitting pneumatic controllers. So no gas venting. So where in a lot of places we're allowed to use locally under that 6 SCFH, no longer going to be able to do that anymore. They all have to be zero. So what does that mean? Could it be, is it something that, instrument air? Sure. You mount that gas back in the process? Sure. I saw Kimray came out with that. There's some retrofit kits that you can actually use to actually, it actually goes full loop on the pneumatic. There is some more technology out there. Those retrofit kits that are only about $20. So
Those are back pressure valves.
For back pressure valves,
Which is questionable. That's a.
It is subject to debate, and that part of the reason I actually included, so this NMAC, this is the New Mexico rule. There aren't very many good definitions of pneumatic out there for exactly what you're talking about. And so that's actually one of the best definitions that I've seen. And there's also a non-emitting controller. And I know these are busy slides. The little QR code that are around and that you can actually get.
Wish everybody.
But ultimately, this is going to be a big deal, right? But the key here is going to be what can we start doing now? Is there anything that can start doing? We know we're going to see some version. This isn't going to go medium right. As we all know, once Colorado does something seems to just show up on it.
You guys have any Colorado clients? I'd be kind of curious, like what they're doing about it. Are they going to like where there's no power available or possible? So, I mean, issues we see is solar. And it's dumping all the time. Can the battery is it possible? That's actually a lot,
We've seen some of the chemical pumps where you've done that.
We
varies
so much
on
solar
the
chemical pumps. I guess I'm worried more about the pumps.
dumps.
Yeah, I have. You got a well that's making a lot of water in your pump, and battery actually can solar charge that.
I've seen them. When you go out on site, operations just bitches and moans. So one of those things that if ops has an issue,
I guess
that
I'd be
you know
curious
it's probably not going to be very
back
bad.
in Colorado. Yeah, what does it work? Is it because it's in the rural Colorado? Is it can it be done
Get it actually.
from an operations standpoint?
Colorado's full fire on the map control. It's a percentage based on how much you're.
Okay, there you go.
Jump in, please.
Perfect, that's what I want to hear.
Yeah. So it is, EPA.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so ours is based on how much,
Okay.
so it's really the bigger.
Bigger facilities are much easier
Much easier.
to mitigate matters. It's the one-offs. Sites.
All right. Reciprocating compressors. So a lot of us have dealt with, especially in the natural gas processing world, Subpart W, some compressed methane. Now we're going required to take. So every 87, 60 hours, so not dead on 1 year, you have to do it 1 year. And at or below 2 SCFM, so that's about 120 SCFH, which in my experience, with the thousands of compressors I've measured, probably, 40 or so percent of them are usually over that I've seen.
That's a big deal.
So it's actually, it really is a big deal.
You can replace right back.
And, ultimately, they're saying that BSER is replacement of the packing or any other necessary repair and maintenance activity. Now, initially, in the first version that we got, they essentially said replacement of packing. And now there's a little bit more leeway with actually other necessary repairs. A key point here is there's a big difference between a compressor. They don't talk about how many throws a compressor. Is it a compressor with one throw or is it one with 8? Because I've seen both, but you still are going to be required to.
Yeah, it's multiple wellhead other compressors and these little ones.
So if it's just at the wellhead by itself, a small production
You're good.
site, you're good to go. If you get into the centralized tank batteries, the larger
Yeah,
facilities,
compressor
that's, the compressor stations, that's where you get full.
One it says right there.
Is this, so when you mentioned the throws, they'll take, they're all routed to sample, or
You can, since it's aggregated for the whole entire compressor, yes. So, or you can do it in digital stuff. All. That being
How would
said,
that work? Each one's got to be below 2. You have it on manifold.
so
Does that then have to be below 2?
So it'll be for the entire compressor has to be. So all of the throws combined, so that's that comment between, right now, there's nothing that says,
That's really hard.
think about how many, difference between 8 throws are most commonly, 6 versus a 1 or 2 throw compressor. So that's something that I actually wrote a comment in. Just to get some clarity there. There's a big difference between a very large compressor at a gas plant with 6 throws versus something at a small production facility that, maybe a single cylinder, on an Ajax engine or something. Centrifugal compressors, very similar requirements. One thing that changed from the first version to now is that they actually did say that it had to be a closed vent system under negative pressure that you routed it to. That's no longer the case. You can just route it to a closed vent system. So especially for some of these smaller facilities and applications that don't have a negative pressure type of flare system, you can actually still route it to a combustor and that will be okay. The other option is to route into process or utilize a self-contained wet seal centrifugal compressor. So just one smaller. A lot of you guys have seen the 9. Really the big difference here is instead of 2 SEFM, it's 3. But again, for those of us that have dealt with especially the larger turbine, wet seal compressor engines, that can be pretty hard to maintain, especially some of the older type solar turbines that I've seen. A key note that they added in is it's got to be measured in operating, but they also allow for standby pressurized mode. Now, I know some of these turbines, they're either operating or they're not operating depressurized. If they shut down, so sometimes the standby pressurized mode may not be an option, but you can use either mode. So technically, if one is under and the other one's not, you might have a good idea of which one to use. It varies a lot, right? I've seen where the standby mode ends up being actually quite a bit worse than the operating mode. Once that oil heats up and all of that, it does a lot better job. Now, on the dry seal side, historically, there really aren't too many regulations out there that have addressed dry seals. Dry seal compressors kind of got pretty fast. You go back to Subpart W, they're exempted, right? So no measurements required. The EPA decided to add that in with this last December's version. And so the reconstruction date is that December 6th, 2022, unlike the rest of the rule that currently still has a November 2021 date, the initial one. So that's part of the reason, as John said, why we would expect maybe there to be some leeway. There's certainly going to be a lot of litigation on that initial date, having two different modification dates, that's gonna be a challenge for everyone. See how that one goes. Combustion control devices, very similar to what we were talking about before. Control efficiency at 95%. We initially commented on a 98% rate, but right now it is written as 95. Performance tests based on the manufacturer test is acceptable. And then there are some requirements potentially for additional flare performance measures. So getting into some of the Colorado ECD stack testing. A little bit flat, but
I mean, I'm interested if you heard about where EPA is with tests.
I haven't heard of a lot here. John, have you heard it? No.
What, in what regard?
Also, Colorado's new performance testing requirement allowed, I believe, the traditional staff test or alternative, all approved by the meeting of these. To get
It's,
this outlet only for. They don't have to do it. Like, they already don't have to do it. Or
On,
Construction efficiency.
right, for combustion, like for thermal oxidizers?
Yes.
yeah, so every storage tank and separator control device. Colorado right now has a.
Okay, so you're doing a destruction efficiency on your VOCs? Okay, yeah. I haven't heard anything about this. And I'm on the stack testing side. I didn't know that they were looking at.
Yeah, I think EPA like silver from. Yeah.
Right. Associated gas flaring. Basically, you can't do it. That's really what it comes down to. Requires routing of all your associated gas to a sales line, or submit a demonstration or by a certified or professional engineer. They do allow other qualified individuals. If I was anybody else, sort of plans like this, that a sales line is unavailable, that other beneficial uses are not feasible for technical or safety reasons. So getting into that, one of the ways that I've seen some companies, and so some of the states that are not allowing really possible or at least restricting flaring, things like running generators out on site, finding Bitcoin, these types of things. It's kind of unique. I've been seeing a lot more of it as a way to essentially still use the gas, but since they don't have a pipeline nearby or they're not able to get the stream operator to be willing to connect in, that's their way of trying to deal with it. Now, sorry, not to pick on.
No, we get to come on time.
But like in the front range, where you're dealing with serious, not non-attainment status. Now you're dealing with a scenario that you can't even do that, right? You put a generator on site, you're going to be doing very different permit. Ultimately, something like that wouldn't necessarily be an option. Not that you couldn't do it, but it wouldn't necessarily be the best option. There are still going to be flare requirements that we're already very familiar with. CFR 6018. So that's the continuous pilot lane, no visible emissions except for a total of 5 minutes in a 2-hour period. Having a minimum net heating value of the gas sent to the flare. So that's part of where I was getting into some of the dry gas, especially in Louisiana, some of these places, dry gas that, have just a water tank sitting out there. And those, that minimum net heating value, that's going to be a problem, right? most of the time they have to supplement with something, whether something like that, just to get the BTU where it's going to bust at that 95% destruction efficiency. And then, of course, what your maximum flare capacity is.
I'll just add that in Colorado. The beneficial use of power. Mining, as you say, that it's not the state governments that are stepping in and starting to do that. Yeah, it's the counties. And the counties that are.
I think I saw something out of that.
Adams County in particular is the first one there. By the state.
Right.
the state.
Nice. Okay. Well liquids unloading. For those of you that aren't familiar with well liquids unloading, applies to gas wells here. And we're not talking truck pull downs. We're talking about when basically you get enough condensate and water downhole and gas actually slows down for your gas production. Essentially, in a lot of cases, a lot of operators would take that gas and route that straight into a tank system. Sometimes it's controlled, sometimes
Yeah, a lot of
it's not.
times it's just water.
Yeah.
You're unloading water out of the well, and as soon as you get gas, you shut it off.
Yep, sometimes it's pretty, and usually it's very temporary. It's not a,
Yeah.
it's not a long-term thing we talked about. It's, but ultimately, not allowed to be venting that gas. Has to be controlled. Where, you know, you might route it into a tank just to clear the liquids out. You know, a lot of these tank systems would just basically vent the gas. So that's not going to be allowed anymore. Anybody in here deal with?
Yeah, we do it a lot. I guess I'm just kind of curious. But.
So,
I mean, we're talking like remote single well, gas well. Highly loaded with water.
I've seen basically a blow down header device on a trailer. And it basically, the way they have it set up is there's one that I saw that had a mobile flare on it, and another one that you could actually hook in.
It's an interesting thing because I mean, some of the liquids are loading. But understandably different. Manual dump, it's just all water until you get gas, and as soon as you get gas,
Once you get gas.
you're not really getting much because you want to sell it, right?
Right.
That's the whole point. So it's just interesting how. I'm not talking like a big site like that.
There's a couple companies that are using filters to capture the gas.
I just think it's such a minimal, I don't know. Yeah.
Or we have some wells where it's. Colorado has had this requirement, it just. Capture, control well, loading, you're only subject to.
Yeah, I mean, I can see a kind of big ones making 3 or 4 million. Some of these we got like. They're not big producers, so you don't have a lot of gas. So I don't know, it's just an interesting challenge for sure.
Or of course, as a part of this too,
Yeah.
BFP, best management practice, that's required to demonstrate that you have zero emissions as well. There's a lot there. Since this is kind of new space, I actually think it's kind of a market gap for a lot of somebody that wants to step up with something pretty, actually making a little.
I encourage you to talk to some of the operators in Colorado, like Paris and Sarah. They are piloting gas wells to. Yeah, the guys in the front range. And gas wells. A lot of piloting. Yeah.
All right. Abandoned wells. So this is what another kind of contentious point. Ultimately, you're going to be required to do fugitive emissions monitoring until wells have been flood, equipment removed, and a final OGI survey has been. So this is one of those things that you have to have a plan in place for this. And as a part of this as well, you have to submit well closure plans. So that's including what your plugging procedures are, documentation of financial assurance, and some questions that I've ended up with from companies. It's going to be costly for some of these companies that their entire focus is marginal wells, talking about less than 10 barrels. And this is something that can be pretty cost prohibitive. And how does that actually end up relating to existing state federal bonding requirements? So getting into some of the BLM stuff as well. And then does the Clean Air Act even authorize a requirement like this that basically goes from the start when you drill the well to, we're talking about something that could be decades away and requiring having a lot of requirements associated with it, guaranteeing as a company that you're going to take care of this. All right. Equipment leaks at natural gas processing plants. So we've got a couple processing side processing. So essentially, we're talking about Appendix K using the OGI. Where it used to be that basically the BSER would have been method 21 from previous programs, we're now talking using camera, but it has to be using Appendix K. Of course, process unit equipment is effective facility, so process unit boundaries, there's not really any difference there from what we've seen in the past. But the big difference here is methane. So it's not just 10% VOC. As a matter of fact, I did see a reference in there to 10% VOC. Just said VOC. So really any concentration of VOC or methane, so it's pretty much everything in the plant is it. So now all of that equipment, like your fuel gas systems, regen gas systems, all your residue gas, you're talking about not just some smaller process type things, but really large process units that you can qualify as spot process units that are now going to be pulled in. You still can use method 21, but keep in mind, when EPA addresses something as the BSER, their intent is that they really want you following whatever that is. So in this case, if you go quad O to quad OB, you really should be using OGI. 5-day first to 10, 15, basically 5-15 days. Every day quad O.
Sorry. Did I pick that up wrong yesterday, 30 and 30? I get it mixed up.
So I'll get into that. So on the compressor stations and well sites, it'll still be the 30 and 30 at natural gas processing. Yeah. For fuel requirements, a lot of us are used to the open-ended valve or line. You're required to have the cap, blind flange plug, or second valve. That is a part of the rule. You can use closed vent systems to comply with some of the process. Your closed vent systems are going to be required to be monitored bi-monthly using OGI or method 21 quarterly. So that is kind of an increase from our annual NPE type inspections. Pressure relief devices monitored, also monitored bi-monthly. And they need to be monitored 5 days after pressure release. One caveat that they added in, which as somebody that used to do a little bit of method 21 that I really like, is this piece of it can be monitored the next time monitoring personnel on site within 30 days. In general, when we go back out and monitor a PSV after it's been repaired, you call it a company happens to be, it tends to be repaired. It is extremely rare that we end up catching that leaking again. So from a cost standpoint, rather than having to send somebody out right away, where you got a weekend or you got a holiday, you've got 30 days now. And chances are, if you have personnel out there monthly, that they're going to make it out on site. getting into well sites and compressor stations. So single wellhead, so there's basically 4 categories here. You have single wellhead only and small well sites. You know, small well sites basically can be a small wellhead, a tank, or basically one small piece of equipment. So that basically those just require quarterly ADO inspections. Once you get into multi-wellhead only sites, so wellheads, you have quarterly ADO, semi-annual OGI. So we're used to the 4-month minimum, 7-month maximum. It's no different here. So you have that 3-month time window survey done. Then well sites with major production and processing equipment, and then your central tank batteries, you're talking about bi-monthly ADO and quarterly OGI surveys. So similar to the compressor stations that we have now under Model A that are quarterly, 60-day minimum. It's the same thing for well sites with the processing equipment. You have tanks, treater, you know, you're now a well site with major production and processing equipment. And then compressor stations, monthly ADOs, and quarterly OGI surveys. So both well sites with major production, so the larger well sites, tank batteries and compressor stations will now quarterly.
Quick question, just to,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, this is all from the last proposed. Yes, there are.
Are there?
So as right now, as a part of for compressor stations and well sites, there's nothing to use that. But on the natural gas processing side, since you'd be following the day, yes. Yep. Yep. Well, yeah. So there are some alternatives. I'll get into some of the bits and pieces of that. But yes, so there are talking with some folks. They're kind of the big one, advanced technology, right? That's a good thing for everybody, especially if it saves everybody money, but also you get better equivalency or even better protection. So there might be some challenges with that. We'll get into. Yes. Not going to read the definition, but there actually is another definition for fugitive emission component. Now, keep in mind that these hatches or other openings on a storage vessel, essentially, if it's a controlled storage vessel, it is a fugitive, including at gas plants. So where historically we haven't really had to deal with covers, hatch seals, some of those types of things. This is under the federal. Those are pulled in. And then, of course, for compressor stations and well sites, for ABO inspections, if you find something, you have 15 days to make a repair. And for OGI surveys, you have the first attempt in 30 days and 30 days final repair. So they do still allow for soap bubbles for verification. I know that's been a really big thing. Everybody can immediately confirm something's repaired. Obviously, in the case of like deep hatches, and there are times that you can't use soap bubbles, so you need to be cognizant of that. I know in Quad-Away, they specifically called out not using soap bubbles for confirmation of leak repair, but it's just something to keep in mind. All right, here's your piece. So they are allowing advanced methane detection technologies to be. They have a couple matrix tables that basically, so you know, for effective facilities, quarterly monitoring, and then getting into the single all well sites with minimum detection threshold of whatever the technology is, and then what the minimum screening frequency is. So yes, right now it's very broad. They don't really give any indication of one technology to another. How, you know, is there one that's better than it? There's none of that. It's just allowing for it. However, you have to keep in mind that you have to initiate a root cause analysis within 5 calendar days. So if, let's say you have continuous sensors on site, what about whatever threshold that you have set. Now you're talking about a scenario that you have to initiate this root cause analysis. What is that? What does that look like? Something that you can just simply say, you go back, look at your records and find out somebody blew something down. Oh yeah, it was definitely. Is this a scenario that you need to send an OGI camera out on site, do an entire survey to confirm that there's no emissions out there? Right now, there's not really a whole lot of guidance there.
We're a drone operator that flies OGI cameras. And those for most. There's a lot of them. We're doing it to prove that we can do it, but very foggy. Clarify so that we understand. The drone is just one piece of the puzzle, but we just want to understand.
They do define a couple pieces of short-term and long-term action levels. So there are, you do have to complete initial corrective actions based on those action levels. Basically, the short term is just somebody for action level. Repeatedly having exceedances, you're gonna need to even get into the corrective action measures where you have to do corrective action plans, and then straight within 60 days. There's a lot of work that could actually go into it. I'm hoping that in the final rule, we maybe will see a little bit more clarification. I love talking to state regulators about it because I know they have a lot of opinions on it and how this actually could be something that would be effective in some cases. One thing that I can say from our standpoint that we've had challenges with, actually, this is just related to some of the Colorado pre-production stuff, is we have a detection, we're gonna go back out with camera to see what it is. And I was actually surprised in some cases how often that you actually have a detect on site. And we've seen some operators that we've worked with that voluntarily installed sensors, whatever it is, the sensors that actually, you're talking about multiple detects in a month. And now, in some cases, it might be a neighbor. Some cases, it might be somebody, some of them have particulate counts, and somebody by the rigs out there smoking right next to your sensor. There's so many different scenarios that you have to be aware of and understand the placement. But if you have to go back out with an OGI camera every time, now if you're out there monthly with an OGI camera anyway, why did you install a continuous system? So I'm hoping we can work through some of those things, but being able to use some of these technologies in an effective way, it is actually less costly.
Better because you can, OGI camera, you watch the film.
Right, exactly. So basically, this is basically just what I was talking about. Will allow for new, more cost-effective technologies. I'm thinking about things like the drones. When you start, especially getting into high-density sites, pipeline systems, those types of things. That's really where that technology really shines. If you've got well sites spread out by 20, 30, 50 miles, maybe not the best technology for you, but recognizing that every technology has options. But let's be honest, if somebody tells you that their technology is the best and it has no weaknesses, they're probably lying to you. But make sure that you're matching the technology that you're looking at. And we're here partially for technology, right? We want to learn, we want to know about it, we want to see what's out there. And there's a lot out there now, from acoustics, OGI quantification, drone, satellite, continuous stuff, you name it. But understand what's your pain goal? What are you doing?
I would add, if any one technology tells you it's a one-stop shop for everything you need, they're wrong. It's not an either or, it's an and scenario, and it's for the asset owner to understand their objectives and then which combination of technologies can keep me compliant in the most efficient way. They're all just pieces in the puzzle.
And then of course, where does the data end up? Is that data that is going to be raw data files put out to the public, something that you're using internally, or you just records to agency? What does that look like? Because if somebody gets a hold of that data that doesn't know what they're looking at, what it actually means, sometimes it may not actually be something that is, you know, a violation, week or something like that. It could be a permitted thing that's going on site. And honestly, I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on Quad OC. Because ultimately, until we actually see what the states are able to roll out, we don't exactly know. So right now, they're saying that, you know, it has to go through the state implementation plan process. EPA is giving states 18 months, and then operators must comply with the state plan once approved in 3 years. You know, I was actually talking with a gentleman from they actually requested 3 years to develop their state implementation plan. Sounded like he was mentioning that a few other states commented on that as well, just because it was going kind of starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And also, you know, industry just needs time, especially for existing sources, to even be able to deal with it.
Our focus is trying to get EPA to allow for more flexibility on demonstration. As Colorado, as you hear, it feels like it's our Rec 7 is like, but not better in a lot of ways, although it doesn't have all. So our struggle is with EPA on saying like, we don't have to demonstrate equivalent pneumatics to pneumatics and tanks to tanks. Like our program as a whole is equivalent and EPA. Well, I know. I was like, I wish there's harder than the elephant about it, but like, that's our approach. Like we think our better. So where our concerns all the time, our concerns which we got for Quad OA. So we got EPA to Colorado's Rec 7 LDAR program was equivalent under Quad OA. Broader and our program is different in specs. Like we over control things. Okay, but we require all.
Yeah, this is the true problem. When you're doing sites or making change. A lot of probably stuff. D, you're retrofitting back. That's the question. Nice.
Well, when you have those sites already, start getting thoughts that they don't have a lot of emissions anyway, but
Yeah, but it's
So
there,
what's-
there's, you know, where they speak go all.
I haven't read the proposal in a while, so I'm curious. My understanding is that the way EPA was defining new source and wrapping in existing sources, like the way that it was defining a well, things like that, is that
If
still?
you did,
Yes.
well, that is not considered.
That's new source.
That's,
yeah,
still,
that's
you-
why
yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
modification. of the-
and once you unload the well, exactly. Yeah, so any action that you take.
It's like a new source under, yeah.
Yeah.
Does Quad OB, Quad OC in disguise?
Sort of, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so basically the reality is, you know, but it's, what I'm trying to process is once we get Quad OC, you have the state, all the state implementation plans and whatever EPA writes up to the states and say, yeah, we not even gonna try to attempt this. Is that essentially that takes the place of Quad OB, right? Because now no different than Quad OB is taking the place of Quad OA. Now you've got Quad OC. And Quad OC is going to be for everything. So
Does that replace Quad OA? You have 3 subsets of Quad OA, subset of sites, subset of sites.
you still have,
I think you still have these rules.
but if you're talking about existing, though, that pulls in everything.
Yeah.
So
I know
that
that
way,
way, that's a lot of Quad OC stuff, right? It's just the subset of rules.
That's next year's presentation.
Yeah, exactly. And one interesting thing is EPA actually has no cost allocation on Quad OC. So from that standpoint, at least for the next years, shouldn't be spending any money on it. But I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to point. that they truly recognize it. Nothing's gonna happen. So what to do now? So this is just getting into some of the future proofing concepts. Now, obviously, as Sean said, you got a new site. You're going to be doing a lot of this stuff. Right? It's going to be a lot more difficult on, but really assessing, can you distribute these costs over multiple cycles? Are any of those newer sites, or if you're modifying a site, is there a way that you can actually design a site in a way to be compliant with the future OOOOc? Also noting a lot of the state and local rules that you're dealing with too. You might already be required to do some of this stuff. And then, I mentioned some of the pieces of there's a lot of different things out there that are being developed as a result of especially on the pneumatic side, to try and deal with this instead of having to do something like setting a generator with an air compressor out at your site. I know, one of the things that came up in a association call that I was sitting on, some of the folks up in the Jones Field that are dealing with the ozone issues. Some of our larger sites, we'd love to just set a gen set out there and go ahead and do instrument there. Well, guess what? You're in non-containment area. You can't really do that. Like it's not really an option for you. That you already deal with ozone action days and things up there that they're trying to prevent combustion. So recognizing some of those other things beyond the rule that become a challenge, you might have to find even further alternatives that you already thought of. The other thing that I always like to point out is accurate equipment counts and associated specs. I've been doing this long enough now to know that most people don't have really good counts of what they have on site, it seems like. And a lot of times it's not because the EHS doesn't have a policy or something set. It's just that people just go and do whatever they want to do sometimes. And so figuring out what pneumatics you have, before you can even start to budget anything, realize how the rule is going to affect you. You need to know how many pneumatics do I have? What are they? What's the brand? What's this, model number on them, so that maybe there are alternatives. Know how many tanks you have. That, any major production equipment you have on site, and of course, combustion devices, and knowing what's your destruction efficiency on. If you're out there and you're still running a pit flitter, that might be something you need to know. All right.
So one of your existing for EPC the pneumatics market and not existing, right? So we're going to get really work the ground. So we're from this piece, we're trying to say, well, one thing this for way of money.
Yeah, I would hope that we'll see more of the retrofit kits, but either way, it's costly.
And the date is good. For we've already ordered them now at versus.
Well, and that
Gets mentioned there. But you can use your system back.
well. So really, this section is getting into, okay, should I take a break? Or? Okay. How many of you guys have read the new version of Appendix K?
I haven't since it changed. I remember last year at this time.
Not a whole lot different.
Even with all the feedback they got.
Not
EK
a
was
whole lot
in that,
different.
one of those meetings, talked about.
No. Of course, one change we got, of course, was not looking like it's going to apply to compressor station. So generally safe from that side, because it was going to be a really difficult thing for that quantity of sites. Even talking to the state regulators that are gonna be dealing with this, I mean, if you're doing a camera inspection, even from a regulator side, if you need to be Appendix K trained, and like all of a sudden that's gonna be a really difficult everyone. But ultimately, one interesting spot that I really like to point out for those of you on the transmission compression side. You have a transmission compression station, compressor station, the new Subpart OOOOb proposal references all of your OGI surveys being conducted as a part of Appendix K, pursuant to Appendix K. So everything you're doing at a gas plant, well, also do OGI surveys at transmission compression stations. And so technically, there actually is a weird overlap there that you could be required to do an Appendix K based station or survey at a transmission compressor station, even though in general for like Quado and a lot of these other regulations.
There's actually lots of Subpart W that propose that here brings in references to Quado, which I found was interesting. That's not approved.
It is, and we've been trying to figure out how we're going to prepare for it, and I can't. You can't. One, and of course, they publish the Subpart W proposal before we even had the December this past year version, like where we had reg text for Quado B and C. So then you're just going, well, so I have to look at this narrative. How does that even work, right? So one important note with Appendix K is it has to be referenced in the subpart. So where it references its Quado B for natural gas processing, but right now for if you're using alternative work practice at like a Quado or a Triple K or whatever, you technically can't use Appendix K until the EPA references it. Sounds like there eventually would be to reference it in some of those subparts, but that's really the idea is they want. So one of the big changes is under the camera operator training. Those of you that read the initial version, it was based on site surveys. And that was one of my biggest gripes because there's a big difference between a well site and a gas plant or refinery. Like what is site survey? They never even defined what a site survey is. So you know, what does that mean? And so I was really happy to see that they switched to hours. That being said, senior OGI operator, minimum of 1,400 hours on the camera. And then you have to keep up every 12 months, make sure you have 40 hours. Shouldn't be too hard, but you think about it, you know, at least if you're having to do, we'll get into the audits if you're doing that stuff, you know, at least you're kind of fulfilling that requirement just based on that. But every single camera operator, you're going to need a total of, I believe it ends up total of 36 hours, if I remember correctly, where you have different pieces of where trainee observes, side-by-side comparative surveys with senior OGI operator, and then 15 hours of supervising independent surveys. And then at the very end of it, there's this 2-hour survey test. Something that they had in the first version was any persistent leaks. If you missed any, you had to redo part of the training and then take your test over again. Where now they at least have this allowance if you find greater than 10 leaks that you can miss up to 10%, which you know, some smaller facilities that can be, well, sometimes you don't find 10 leaks, but at least there is a little bit of an allowance there. The other requirement is operators attending a biannual classroom training. It was annual. So you'll see, you know, as I'm walking through this, pretty much all the concepts that they published in the first version are still intact. It's just that they either made them slightly less restrictive or changed, you know, from surveys to hours, slight little changes. Performance audits, essentially 2 hours comparative monitoring. This was 4 hours, so again, a place where they made it less restrictive, but the concept is still there. So that can be real time with the senior OGI operator, or it can also be raw uncut video. So you can actually submit 2 hours of raw uncut video. I don't know about if anybody here would qualify as a senior OGI operator, but I would hate. And quite frankly, I actually think that the people that you want out in the field doing these surveys are your senior OGI operators. They're the most qualified to be able to find leaks and things in the field. I think we're going to see, as a result of these performance audits and these requirements, that their entire focus is going to be training other people, and instead of actually being out in the field and detecting leaks and doing what they really should be doing.
Hours to be a senior.
Exactly.
Don't need
Field conditions. One change that they made here was they're actually going to allow the camera manufacturer to set the camera operating envelope. So that was a big concern of mine. If you read through, there are a lot of requirements of how to set up this operating envelope and how you stay in it and all of that. At this point, at least a camera manufacturer, talking a little bit to Clear, they said their intention is to actually do this and figure out independently and figure out what can the camera see based on, wind, temperature, and even phase precipitation. I think they're trying to wrap their heads around what it even looks like. But at least we can get to a point where you can go out on site and go, it's 50 degrees, wind is 10 miles an hour. So I can see a distance of X and at least be able to use that as opposed to developing an envelope on site, doing it, with 4 of your people. There's a lot of requirements there. Methodology and survey procedures. This is the piece that really scares me. Full video of the survey must be recorded. That's a change. That's a big change. That's an expensive change. That's a major, that is a data nightmare. And I'm not even sure, how we're going to keep up with the amount of video footage that, we're talking terabytes, one company of video footage from our standpoint, where you're already going to be required to do a QA video of 5 minutes long, daily instrument checks. You've got all of these other videos that you're already required to do, and your entire survey video as well. Another piece of this is going to be the monitoring surveys. There's 3 approaches you can use. They actually specifically call out, for example, in gas plants where you already have a component base in place, so you tagged all of your equipment. It's not a substitute for any of these 3 approaches. So getting into use of a route map, designated observation locations, use of visual cues, or GPS route tracing. I thought it was kind of unique. I'm curious to see what Clear comes out with. I know Champion X camera that I saw out there, they actually have some really GPS capability built into the camera. It's real accurate. So the old Clear cameras and the opt-out camera that I've seen, the GPS can be a quarter off sometimes and do all over the place. So it's going to be really hard to demonstrate that you're supposed to be everything. And then this is the one that always kind of cracks me up. They're going to require brakes. I've been doing this for years, and I can say that this, personally, in some cases, the larger facilities, it's kind of already a default where you use 2 OGI operators, and that's an allow method. But where we're entering a time where OGI operators are going to be few and far between that can operate independently. Putting 2 of your OGI operators on site, that may not be something that you might even have one to spare. Well timed. So EPA did release this chart. It actually looks a little bit different. The numbers are slightly less than what they were, but similar cross sections. In general, they require every single component 2 seconds at two angles. So this is one of those things I'd be curious if anybody has any feedback here. As somebody, that does get out in the field sometimes and use the camera, how in the world do you pick an area? So maintain distance, measure cross, you're guessing, right? How do you prove that cross section is the area that you're talking about here? And not only that, count the number of components to know that you're doing it correctly. I'm not sure how you even use this table necessarily in a way that you can effectively always tell somebody, I comply with this table. Because if you're, yep, okay, I've got 8 components, but I was 1.25 meters. You know what? Doing that continuously over the course of the day, I really don't know how you do that.
How are they gonna audit it? How are they gonna audit that?
I think that's good. It's gonna be hard to audit, but some of the full videos of the surveys, you know, that they might be able to see some of it. Yeah,
As we went through Appendix K, I mean, it became apparent to our team that some of this is written by people who never even.
definitely. Monitoring plan requirements. This is very similar to what we saw in Quad Lane. What the monitoring plan requirements are there. One note is one plan can cover multiple facilities. So something that I always like to recommend. If you have a lot of similar facilities, create a plan. Don't change it and have an appendix that you update as new facilities get added. And then you can have site-specific information in that. Because the core of what you're doing doesn't really change. Your procedures for conducting monitoring survey don't change. If there's something that's small as a part of for a specific facility, you can put that in the appendix and that's fine, but at least the core of your monitoring plan is consistent. Record keeping, it's just a whole bunch of stuff. It's a typical 5-year record retention policy. But remember, if you did that. So what can you do now? Ultimately, you know, tracking what every single OGI operator, classroom and field training activities, what have they done in the past? EPA actually specifically calls out now that you can use previous experience. That was one of those things that was actually everybody commented on. Nobody's going to technically be a senior OGI operator if you start here. Like, how do you even start? How do you train anybody? And so, just based on that, now we have to go back in time. Right? And I'm thinking about when I first started, all my records were on paper. And, you know, I didn't have a database or anything like that. It's going to be a little bit difficult for me to come up with how many hours I actually spent on the camera. I got papers here and there. And as we started using our Lead Tracker Pro system, we can pull that information now, but that's going to be something that you need to look at. And is everybody trained? One of the other pieces is I have seen some OGI monitoring equipment that I've seen folks use that would technically not be compliant with an Appendix K type survey or even compliant for Quad OOOb. So making sure that you do have a camera, have a typical or optical, or some of the normal cameras out there, you're probably safe. But it's definitely worth taking a look at. Tracking all OGI camera maintenance records. That's another thing that is required as a part of Appendix K. They want to have all your calibration records, everything that you have. And that's got to go back 5 years. So technically speaking, if you start using Appendix K and you end up day one, you need to have 5 years worth of records for that camera of all of the calibration, different things, maintenance records that you've had on that camera over that 5 years. And then, of course, personnel training level. Like I said, where are you at? Do you have senior OGI operators? Do you even have one? Do you have people that can qualify as a regular OGI operator? If they're a regular OGI operator, is it a scenario that you want to get that person before Appendix K happens to the point that they're a senior OGI operator? And really accelerate the time that they have on the camera intentionally. And then, what's your data management? I know I have a little shameless plug for Lead Tracker because I helped work on that. But what technology is there a database system that you have that you're using that can actually track all of the required information that you have to report? Really started with Quad OOOOb. There's a lot of intricate pieces of information, even getting into metadata that you have to collect. There's a lot more here. Can it handle training information and other things? So, as a software developer, if you're using the software, are they preparing for Appendix K? It's worth asking those questions now.
Also running, the customers want us to keep the scans forever, but they don't. Now we're trying to figure out storage, risk management side, since we are encouraging third party viewer, right? Are they gonna start hacking us? Our band's out on the site, so we see the logo. I'm like trying to get the logo off our bands. Because they're coming for us, right? And the last thing you want is to have Chevron as a customer and one of their scans that shows a leak is now out on social media. They hacked your system. So I mean, it's, those of us that are doing this, it's a nightmare.
And it's something that we've been talking a lot internally about attention.
Right.
A lot of times we don't talk about, you know, unfortunately, we tend to just save everything forever. And, you know, there are times where we'll have a client of ours up there. So remember that thing, you know, 9 years ago that you had, you have that? And, you know, fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't know, we can pull that up. But there's also those scenarios that you can get some, or, you know, you name it, that you, if you have it, must produce it.
Exactly.
But if you have a records retention policy, you say, guess what? It says 5 years here, at 5 years, it's gone. Automatic, and our IT system does it automatically. We don't need to do it.
But the legal team is saying, get rid of it. Sales team is saying, no, we need
No.
to keep it, right? So. Put it in cold storage. We're looking at blockchain to make it difficult to get to. I mean, this is a problem.
Before, we actually used to use external hard disks for the longest time. Like back in the day when, as our IT department, said, storage is expensive on our servers. Like we don't want this video on our servers. It's cheaper for you to go get a, you know, 1 terabyte at the time. I think it's 250 gig, you know, one. But you know, we started saving videos on that over a period of time. It's a challenge.
It is. And then do you charge the customer for the storage?
I'll tell you what, at this point, if we're
I
recording
think we're there.
all of it, and that's that piece of using some sort of, you know, database system to do it, right? Because for me, you know, that's what we talked about with our lead tracker system for a while. Is at some point, data has to go away, and even within database like that. And if we're going to start under Appendix K, recording the entire survey, hours and hours of uncut video, I mean, there's no way. I mean, we would cease to exist just from the cost of all of that data storage. I think I really went through most of this already. Have to touch on it. That's a scary thing. The super emitter response program, as you guys know, it's allowing lots of different people to actually just go out. You basically file a complaint. The key piece here is this 100 kilograms per hour. This is actually a pretty big number. That's something that I like to point out. That's not, I've got a beef hash leak. That's a big number. That has to be some sort of major process issue, or I could see that being something like an unlit or open detach, or you know, those types of things. But is that going to be a leak? Now that being said, you know, there's a lot of things that we need to be aware of. So getting into some of the technologies that I've seen out there actually produce, I've seen plus or minus 68% error with some of these flyover, some of the flyover data. And the biggest piece there being they didn't have a met station on site. For a lot of us that are in really remote areas, sometimes they're using the airport that could be 50, 100 miles away for their met data, and that's not what the site conditions are. And so you end up with some pretty significant errors sometimes. So, you know, I'm really going to be curious to see how EPA deals with. I mean, this is going to cause a flood of information coming into the EPA, and are they even going to be able to be responsive to go? This got brought. I know in Colorado we've seen some of them where we've been able to, you know, help operators respond with videos and different things, and a couple of folks that we addressed some videos there. You know, we OGI surveys out on site, that, show that everything's fine. But, how do you address these things? Right now, it's not really clear cut. But
They'll kick into the states because they don't have the money to.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so
Yes.
You know, over 5 times and you're good, and one and you're bad, the next thing you know,
It is really important to know when you're not. Yeah, exactly. We were part of a program, just a voluntary. That included some of that's actually, this picture. It actually included some of the. Several other things. And had a professor that was basically trying to prove his hypothesis. It really didn't like OGI. And basically, he was trying to prove that some of the lighter technology, and then at the same time having this paper that said plus or minus 68%. That's where I got that number, by the way. But what they would do is they would only show, oh, we found this leak. And then they're like, well, you were flying over our site for almost 2 hours. Where's everything else? Like, we need some context, or even be able to see not just our site, but this is somebody else. Can we see, like, is it gas that's coming over that, so it became really difficult to have, if you're going to do a root cause analysis, try and figure out, because most operators do want to get it taken care of. As you want it done. But if you don't have any context and somebody just goes, here you go, fix it, you go, what? Fix what? I can't even do a root cause analysis because you didn't give me all the data associated.
that's the problem with flyovers.
Right.
Out there. We had a customer, it wasn't there.
Yep.
He was on their back and it wasn't.
I've actually, there was one scenario that we had, turned out it was wastewater treatment plant. Right, just a mile away. It's like, oh, not us. Like, yeah, so that, this is part of the Quad B, Quad C. Once that gets published, this is. My last slide that I'd like to scare everybody with. Mostly just to draw some awareness, so recognizing that as a part of a lot of this IRA, you're going to be charged per fee per ton of methane. There's a lot of stuff out there right now that we don't really. One key point here is that it's outside the Quad B or C rulemaking. Could it maybe be Subpart W? I've heard some rumors there. Who's going to be responsible for it? Is it going to be the states? Is it going to be the IRS? Nobody really knows right now. But the key thing to note here is if you comply with Quad B, C, right now, if you can show equivalence or better reduction, and the EPA authorizes it, so they have to make a determination on that Quad B, C.
per basin or per site?
Per site, I'm pretty sure is the
One
one
you
I'm
have a whole
hearing.
basin, so can you just exclude that site from your methane emissions?
The way they have it set up, yes.
Even if you might have 300 sites in the basin, you can just start cut those out. Those don't count.
On the Quad C side,
Yeah.
and if you're talking existing sites and you pull in everything, now you can end up being exempt from the methane if EPA does that equivalency piece.
Let's turn that right around.
So it's one of those things that it does tie in with the Quad B/C stuff. Hopefully that timing actually ends up. Actually, really heard anything as far as timing for a final rule. What I'm hearing is sometime at the earliest August, but they're expecting it by the end of the year. That's what I can see.
Methane fees, the way out of them, I just take it off the subpart W. Starting all the information they need to generate. That's very starting this.
You report.
Give you
Yeah, sites that report.
Yeah,
The
sketches.
sketches.
That's something that's.
But how, yeah, but how are they gonna be able to know, like? That makes sense,
Thank you.
you know, stuff that's not reported.
That's what he was getting at is where was it? Sure, is this MRR the right place to do it, or is it somewhere else?
I mean, it's just off the subpart.
Yeah, that's where you gotta start. That's what.
Yeah.
And you expand that applicability, then.
Yeah, and there's been talk about that, too, and I haven't heard much more about that, is, they were giving us like 10,000, but I don't know if that's even out there officially.
It's not out there officially yet, but I actually heard the same thing.
Yeah.
So, and been talking about it. And which, I mean, that pulls in pretty much everything. There are very few basins that I've seen that.
Yeah.
That are, that get up to that 10,000.
And that's also, those fees are,
It's gonna be interesting.
another question on that fee, is that, so let's say, I'm just throwing this out, you got a basin and you get, let's just say 1,000 tons of methane. Get to that threshold, methane intensity, are you at $900 for 1,000? Or is it only the $900 you get assessed the fee that's over, say that you needed to get to 500 to get under the threshold? Is it 900 times 1,000 or 900 times 500? Is it the excess emissions or?
I think it's the.
That's my understanding, I just want to hear.
Yep, that's.
We're evaluating like it's everything.
Yeah, I think you have to, and since they specifically just say fee per ton of methane, then one thing I've gotten a lot of questions around too. Can they pull in as a part of it, or does it?
They're saying methane.
Because, and I'm sticking with the methane.
Yeah, because it's a methane
It has
intensive, it has to be methane because it's a methane intensive thing.
So, because then it gets real scary when you start getting into how you're gonna pull in CO2s. Now you're talking your combustion, all your engines, flaring, all of that. But at least that, the other thing that I'm hearing a lot on with this is where you have a lot of people that have rigs that they converted, they start using natural gas instead of diesel because of burning. Now they're gonna go, well, natural gas engine because of that methane slip and all of that. Now, maybe we don't want to use natural gas engines. I was just talking to a frac crew the other day about that. And they're going, well, we might end up going back to diesel because if our companies are paying per fee in methane, you know.
Well, the whole thing with the subpart W revision, I mean, makes it very difficult too, right? We're just trying to do everything that's evaluated now. They change the rules, they change emission factors. You're changing the grading scale all the time, trying to assess the fee. So it's a really difficult time with this. They just said, this is what you gotta do. Okay, we can do everything we can, but we still are, but we're not even sure how we're gonna judge. The whole thing with methane slip, changing the combustion emission factor for methane, I mean, there's a lot that has to be.
Hey, updating it.
Subpart, they've posed a whole bunch of stuff with like pneumatics, high bleed, low bleed. LDAR intermittently, get a lower factor. It's a lot of changes, but which the problem, the changes are one thing, it's just the timing when you have this out there. How do you?
We need to even be from actually kind of the lab emission factor. OGI leak surveys.
Yeah, it's all changing.
That's actually changing as well.
Yeah, the component counts all changing. Proposed.
They're using API's data, because API's been trying to get them to change those emission factors.
I don't know whether, I'm sorry.
Sure. You're right, though. I would remember. Presentation.
It's, you know, on certain ABC, there's certain things. Estimates and certain things. So far, W, there's certain things that are some that they're under right now.
I like a lot of the default factors, but I think in a lot of cases, should just allow you, like some of the other places like that.
Yeah.
Like allow operators to figure out, because they might actually even have measurements that they completed themselves or,
Well, so part of the subpart that you proposed, well, they didn't allow you to use stack testing data for nothing. Wasn't even in there.
Wasn't.
Used. Like, well, if I got a testing data, why can't I use that?
From a regulator perspective, it's just so hard to know what you're comparing then, right? Like,
That's true.
so in Colorado, all we know is like, we don't love W, and we like to let operators say specific data, but then it makes verifying the information
difficult.
so challenging that we don't know. So we're a little bit more flexible in using like specific information to generate your emission factors for yourself. But like, we're finding it so challenging to verify the accuracy of our inventory that we're like getting less and flexible because it's just an overwhelming, like, we have some operators that use like actual, they go out and they count pneumatic actuations and they like direct measure then, and they're like, well, we want to use these measure factors for our pneumatics. And we're like,
That's a slippery slope.
I don't either, how to
There's
verify
other-
that.
there's other
And most-
things that are not-
and so it's very, very challenging. So I appreciate why EPA wants everybody to use the same thing. Yeah, but there's this sliding scale between consistency and accuracy and ultimately the agency, like how they're gonna look at it from the perspective of how are we gonna compare? How are we gonna make sure we're comparing? That's been a real struggle.
I appreciate it.
I'm Robin. Yeah, Stephanie and I are here.
Yeah,
Really
Oh, no, I
appreciate it.
was
I love it.
I read the proposal and Colorado's comments in the initial, but I haven't.
Thank you all. See you around.
Thanks, guys.
You bet. I know. If it stays warm like this, the after lunch presentations are going to be brutal.
Uh-huh. You guys are back up.
Second piece of presentation in a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah, at 11, Robert will come in. And then 30. I know, I know.
We'll get to it. It's Miller time.
Come on. I can pay that. Where's the you?
That is rapid. Good job, man. Thanks. What'd you say?
It was good.
Okay.
I do appreciate when people give their feedback. More people. Guys talk. Back, you guys.
Policy maker, which is Colorado, Texas.
Just give your technical presentation, like yes, no, but then have Nice to hear. Yeah, we're so.
There's a couple times, the TC, you guys did this.
Well, we didn't have TC.
I was kind of,
One or two people.
I was,
There's always a compliance guy.
yeah.
Yeah, but this one was, it was nobody, There's
They wanted to like the more on the OG, just appendix. So
there were some pretty decent. Maybe turn out a little different. I do need to pull that
We
USB.
got-
Thank you.
we got emails just a week ago saying, I believe, pulling down EMC and, hey, John, train the operators in your area.
Make it happen.
Dan, you better fill me in here.
We can make Dan available. Definitely. Questions on the slide. It's the author here, so.
Yeah, I'd like that you guys could do this. That's what.
On this, we were preparing as a team. We're gonna do that. It's really smart. It's actually simple, because people were trying to figure out, and the way these get uploaded up to the last day, sometimes, especially if you do make changes. We just had our IT people, hey, when I make a change, keep it current. It's just going, it takes you to a launch page. It has all the presentations. So it doesn't take you to the main website, you just want to go there, just this. Simple. Let's try it. Thanks. Good talk this morning too.
I had to stay back for a call, so. Oh, man. Sounded that, right? Is it the same code at the four tabs are on this? I'm gonna. Yeah, that. Yeah, thank you for.
Sure. Yeah. Get 315. Yeah. Always free out. Well, you know, that stuff. Yeah. All those issues are reflected. I appreciate it. I don't even know how you. That first direct. Interview, you know, like. I don't know. That's all of a sudden. Right, so we're just like, well. Yes, there's some stuff, so now it's going ahead. What you could do, yeah, but. So. We're. Now. Oh, sorry. Right. You're not. Right. Where it is. We'll find some. That's what we like that. briefly way back. Thanks a lot. I mean, oh, yeah. I do. I don't understand. My emotions was scared. Is that good? Yeah. He's got some pretty witty. Sometimes the sarcasm. Yeah, before I did. And then they start, you guys are laughing, or whoever wanted to find. We always. We appreciate all those efforts. He's out there, yeah. Oh, somebody's. You know what? The problem is. I don't have to. Yeah. Don't see it. Yeah, I knew something was going on when you were here. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I understand. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah. 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 Mhm. Heard it. Yeah. 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 Oh, yeah. yeah, some of those guys that have not previous yet, Dustin, yeah. Yeah. Sorry to hear that, Matt. Great work with Matt. I mean, we're with gas and stripping because of you and the relationship you built. So let me know what you're thinking, where you land, and it's you know, it may be a totally different industry. I don't know. Man, it's been great. It's been great working with you. I'm gonna miss you. Honestly. What is this for? Like non-compete? Yeah.